Great. So now we are talking about jumpstarting your people analytics journey. I know we want to talk about people analytics quite often, and it gets lost sometimes, especially with the craziness around the pandemic and all of the chaos that hospitals are dealing with and continue to deal with. But I'm so excited that we have Jared Crosby and Matt Scheit from ScottMadden here to share a little bit about people analytics and how that can help us navigate the next several months. Jared and Matt, thanks so much for being here.
Sure, thanks, Zainab. Hi, everyone. I'm Jared Crosby, and welcome to our segment on jumpstarting your people analytics journey. Um, Thanks, Matt. So, just quick introduction to ScottMadden, and thanks, Zainab, for that introduction again. We are a 35-year-old management consulting firm. We're a very hands-on organization. We're focusing today on our practice, corporate and shared services practice, in which we help organize everything from strategic planning through implementation. Um, we bring very experienced teams who produce practical and measurable solutions. We've done a large number of projects, as you can see on here, many of those multi-year and some shorter based on client needs. And these really we provide support to all the back office and middle office functions in your organization. So what does this really mean, in terms of today? Well, we help organizations with support functions, so HR is one of those, as well as all the other administrative functions you might find in a healthcare organization. We help to make those more efficient, more integrated, looking at things and making sure you're getting value out of your technology, that we have integration through policies and processes into the organization, and even down to things like leveraging your data, information, and knowledge to bring the best support to operations, clinical side of your organization, and of course, ultimately, patient care. In terms of human resources and healthcare capabilities, what might you find us doing and helping HR organizations with? It could be setting an HR strategy. How do we transform the HR organization? Shared services design and implementation. Could be assessing current organization and the operations in HR and how we make those more efficient. And of course, as we're going to talk about today, analytics and automation. Understanding healthcare is something that we bring to the table. The constant changes you've seen in the industry, the market changes, affordability, verticalization, and of course integration and growth of systems, complex governance, very significant user groups and domains within healthcare, and industry-specific challenges unique for HR. Looking at the workforce of the future, dealing with turnover, dealing with the needs of quick onboarding and recruiting challenges. All of those things are things that we understand through our various clients. And we've included a few sample of those for you here today. So with that, very quick, brief introduction to share with you some of the work that we do and where we focus. Matt's going to focus in on people analytics journey that we came to speak to you about today. So Matt, I'm going to hand things over to you from there.
All right, thanks, Jared. So yeah, my name is Matt Scheit. Hope everyone is doing well. So I've spent nearly all of my 6 years kind of at ScottMadden helping HR organizations transform how they work. My engagements over the last couple of years have really taken me deeper into people analytics as we continue to help clients introduce and accelerate their people analytics capabilities to further their HR and organizational objectives. Before we go any further, let's take a quick moment and define people analytics. All right, there's lots of definitions. Everybody kind of has their favorite, but let's keep it simple. So people analytics, it's the practice of turning disparate employee data into insights that drive business decisions. So, without data, carrying out some key objectives of HR, so getting the right talent in the door, nurturing and retaining those individuals, creating an inclusive culture. It can be a little bit like grabbing a handful of darts, closing your eyes, and throwing them at a target, right? It's going to be a scattered approach. You may or may not end up anywhere near the target. But with kind of a thoughtful, data-driven approach, You can inform business decisions, kind of reduce costs. I think turnover is a good example. Increase engagement and productivity, enable effective risk management, and ultimately ensure better customer outcomes. I think another important call out here, and it's kind of a wrapper around all of HR's activities and objectives and the business outcomes there at the bottom. There's a renewed focus on many organizations to ensure that employees are treated fairly and equally, right? We want to eliminate unintentional biases, including the hiring process, how employees are developed and moved up in the organization, and even how they're paid. And part of inclusiveness is setting goals, and data can help you prioritize and measure progress against those goals. I like to say that kind of HR holds the keys to the kingdom when it comes to employee information. And it's up to us in HR to kind of safeguard and leverage that data for good. There's a line of thinking that if HR doesn't step up its game, take a more analytical approach, someone else in the organization will. As an example, some feel that marketing should take over the responsibility for attracting and retaining talent. The external facing element, of talent acquisition, as well as kind of the available data, I think are a couple of the main drivers there. But among other things, I think these folks kind of miss the mark with the role that kind of internal and HR data can play. Right. So in HR, we have access to lots of employee data across numerous systems, right? From your core HRIS system to time and attendance, performance management. And when we combine that data with kind of operations and departmental data as well, we have an incredibly powerful kind of complete data set that we can leverage. We just need to take the reins and use that data to support our employees, advise our leaders, and kind of enable overall organizational growth. And in some ways, this is a pretty big shift from what HR has done traditionally. But one thing we've seen kind of throughout 2020 is HR can be more flexible and agile than we thought we could. The toothpaste is out of the tube, so to speak, on that. But now we need to start looking ahead. And to me, that's where people analytics comes in. So as we start talking about jumpstarting and accelerating the people analytics journey, let's take just a minute here to maybe talk about the people analytics maturity curve. So 4 levels, kind of down at level 1, you have ad hoc reporting. So basically periodic snapshots of kind of metrics and measures requested by others. And in addition to kind of an operational reporting focus, we tend to see incomplete or inaccurate data here as well, and maybe even a lack of priorities. Level 1 is certainly not uncommon, but we're seeing more and more organizations kind of make that jump from level 1 to level 2. And level 2, we kind of, we call that proactive reporting. So using dashboards and scorecards, and instead of a push to the users, they can now pull that information kind of using self-service. And those metrics and measures have shifted to kind of measures of business value. And we start to see kind of the proactive identification of people-related business issues as well. So we see a lot of organizations with dashboards, and some of them have had these dashboards for a pretty long time, but they struggle from a usability and effectiveness standpoint, which often makes it difficult to move up to kind of level 3, which is that advanced analytics. Right here, we start pulling together data sets from across the organization, look at correlation and causation using statistical models. And we do see some level 2 organizations do one-off modeling, but typically not in a sustainable fashion. And to be really effective here in level 3, we see many organizations establish HR or people analytics COEs, or centers of excellence, that can look across systems and even collaborate with kind of business or clinical analytics teams that are already in place. And then lastly, we have kind of level 4, really focusing on predictive analytics to provide actionable guidance to leaders. So using advanced tools for scenario planning and forecasting, and HR leverages those to drive key decisions in the C-suite. Now, I do want to say, the move up the maturity curve, it's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, and you can't skip steps. So the foundation is incredibly important as you start that journey. So let's talk about how to set that foundation and kind of accelerate your move up the maturity curve, right? These are practical steps you can start leveraging immediately if you haven't started your journey, or kind of fold in if you're already moving through kind of that level 1, level 2, or maybe even beyond. So first, cultivate strong executive sponsorship. So start with the defined mission and vision for where you want to take people analytics to get that initial kind of executive support. And then once you have it, the executive backing will help you gain credibility within HR, as well as kind of weather the progress, the fits and the starts, and ensure what's produced can be leveraged and absorbed. And then as you gain momentum, the executives can help you share successes and gain buy-in with other functional and clinical leaders as well. Second, understand your data and its limitations. In some ways, the limitations will help you set your path forward, at least in the near term, right? It's not uncommon to have data across 3, 4, 5 HR systems that don't talk to one another and have varying degrees of data quality. So when you're thinking about where to start, it makes sense to start a project whose foundation sits on solid data. Third, know your capabilities from a technology, talent, and organizational standpoint. Many of our clients are new to people analytics, don't have funding, fancy tools, in-house data scientists, but a lot can be accomplished with some basic know-how and tools to which many of us already have access. You also have to keep in mind what the organization can and will support from an outcomes perspective, which is kind of a good segue into number 4. So start small and add value. So your initial stakeholders or customers are probably going to be within HR or perhaps maybe a single department leader. But either way, select pilot projects and hypotheses that will help solve real business needs. And then last, consider privacy and ethics. So we're all becoming more cognizant and sensitive to what information is collected, how it's used. So only collect and analyze what you need. And similar to kind of bringing the business along with you in your journey, it's also a good idea to bring your employees along. Be upfront, be transparent with them. We've seen initiatives and whole people analytics functions kind of grind to a halt because of poor communication and a lack of transparency. So with that foundation in mind, let's get a few of our kind of real world examples for people analytics in the healthcare space. We've picked 3. Each one kind of moves a little bit further up the maturity curve. And so we'll start with kind of the real-time HR dashboard here. And to set the stage a little bit on the first example, from an HR perspective, this hospital system was kind of firmly planted in level 1 of that maturity curve. Ad hoc reporting, multiple systems, data integrity issues. And then additionally, and I think many of you can empathize, the field HR team spent nearly all of their time fighting fires rather than serving as true HR business partners. And so knowing their system, data, and people analytics talent challenges, we decided to start small with kind of an integrated HR dashboard that HR business partners could leverage in working with and advising their business leaders. We thought about it as a first step to field HR becoming more strategic, as well as a first step in their analytics journey. So we had the reporting team pull together some Excel reports of their most reliable data, which among others included employee engagement scores, turnover data, recruiting metrics, performance ratings, and then moving outside of HR, patient satisfaction scores as well. It only took a couple of weeks to gather and clean the data and then kind of develop and test the dashboard with stakeholders, both within HR and select department leaders. Keep in mind, these stakeholders were used to seeing kind of ugly one-off reports without much depth or really any insight either. These same folks were kind of blown away when they saw that data displayed in a simple, cohesive format. It was kind of a game changer and a new tool that linked together data from across systems and called out interdependencies. And when we talk about starting small and building momentum, this is what we mean, right? It was a quick project, leveraging a subset of their data that generated a fairly large impact for HR and the business leaders. As I mentioned, field HR, they're really firefighters more than business partners. So now we had this on-demand kind of dashboard that linked different data and told a story. Field HR had to shift their mindset, their role a little bit, right, to becoming more advisors. So in conjunction with the dashboard, we also conducted a competency survey to understand capabilities and identify gaps in the field HR team. And from there, we set a path to close those gaps to help the team use and leverage the dashboard itself, but also in advising and consulting with their leaders. So move on to the second example here, timekeeping impacts on payroll. So we had a healthcare client who was concerned with compliance and process issues surrounding timekeeping and payroll. So I think overtime usage and approval and rejection of that time, missing punches, lots of payroll corrections, data accuracy, the list goes on. So we ended up reviewing 12 months of time and attendance data, literally millions of lines of data, as well as their timekeeping roles, responsibilities, approval structures. And with that kind of analysis in hand, we're able to identify and address key compliance risks, as well as policy and process enhancements and standardization. And it's here that we start moving up that maturity curve, right, from kind of the dashboarding to resolving real business issues. For the purposes of kind of our discussion today, I'll just focus on the process improvements. Based on the data of when corrections are submitted and by whom, we determined that pay closure window and timekeeper roles needed to be adjusted. All right, so with a couple simple adjustments to structure and process, we saw corrections could be reduced by 20%. Yeah, this was fairly significant for the organization and provided some immediate hard dollar cost savings in terms of kind of manual checks and some other things they were doing. Additionally, it freed up the payroll team to conduct more value add work with their time. So I think data analysis, compliance related activities and things like that. I think it's always a little hard to kind of quantify or see the value of soft dollar or time savings. But as I think more broadly kind of about how we move up the maturity curve, and what if that extra time was used to analyze the correlation between time and attendance data and turnover or engagement? Maybe we end up seeing something like overtime or payroll corrections as leading indicators of engagement and employee satisfaction. Again, we're moving further up the maturity curve, the correlation, the causation, and even anticipating some issues. And I think that takes us kind of nicely into the last example for today. So the hospital system in our third example already had a proactive reporting approach, on-demand dashboards and scorecards, certainly a pull rather than a push. However, kind of registered nurse or RN turnover was a big issue. Clinical leaders were putting a significant amount of pressure on HR to solve the problem. So RN turnover, it's not a big surprise given the environment, but kind of back to my earlier analogy, HR was kind of throwing darts in the dark a little bit at the problem, right? So they had deployed things like tuition assistance programs, sign-on and retention bonuses, and they're having limited success. So we set out to help them identify the true drivers and the impacts of RN turnover, and then set a path forward to meaningful change. We started with a similar data set to the first example with a few added elements. Without going into too much detail about the process itself and the analysis itself, I just want to share some interesting findings. So first, RN turnover was absolutely correlated with overall patient satisfaction, which also links directly to revenue, right, through lower reimbursement rates and over time, potentially reduced patient volumes. So we know turnover is expensive from a talent acquisition perspective, but it's also expensive from a revenue perspective. And so it's a bit of a double whammy, right? So it's a major challenge that hospital systems need to solve. And next, and this goes kind of back to adding value to the business. If the hospital system could just reduce RN turnover to the national average, they could save more than $5 million. So I'll pause here for a second. I wanted to bring this up because remember, tying findings back to costs or business results can really help you build a business case for creating other pilot projects or expanding kind of the role and the depth of your people analytics function. So then we went a little deeper into first year RN turnover. It was twice the national average and accounted for nearly a quarter of all RN turnover. And while the client knew turnover was an issue, they didn't have a grasp of kind of the magnitude in terms of volume or cost. We also built a predictive turnover model, going deeper into RN turnover, at least initially, right? And then we expanded it out. But we found the two largest predictors for first year turnover were part-time status and being a Gen Xer. The latter was a real surprise. You know, we expected the younger generations to lead the way from a turnover perspective. Now, as interesting and telling as the analysis and the findings were, you know, it's important to call out the data doesn't give you the answers. It does highlight where you need to dive deeper and where other initiatives or programs could be used to help resolve, you know, kind of the root cause of, you know, the issues you're facing. You know, in this case, once we went through analysis, we identified kind of the key challenges and issues. We started planning pilot projects around strategic workforce planning for RNs, reimagining RN onboarding, developing engagement and career pathing programs for them as well. So, you know, the example here certainly was focused on the RN population, but keep in mind this kind of analysis and work can be done for any position in your organization. It just takes a thoughtful approach and the right support. So 3 examples of how you can leverage the people analytics to elevate, you know, the role of HR in your organization and help drive meaningful change for employees and leaders. As we close out the analytics discussion, you know, the most important thing kind of to advance yourselves up that maturity curve is maybe just start experimenting a bit with some of the higher level activities. But remember though, you can't outright skip levels. And to keep yourselves grounded and drive that progress, keep in mind kind of those 5 foundational tips, right? Cultivate strong executive sponsorship, understand your data and its limitations, know your capabilities, start small and add value, and then consider privacy and ethics. So with that, I will pass it back to Jared to close us out.
Thank you, Matt. Just a little bit about why ScottMadden here, our personal approach and philosophy, which we'll make sure you can access as you have this presentation from Matt. But Matt, why don't we go ahead and close out? I think we have a final slide with our contact information. So we want to quickly get to Matt, and I did. I'm Jared Crosby, partner at ScottMadden. Thanks for joining us today. You can see our contact information for both Matt and I here. I've been with ScottMadden and focused on HR for almost 20 years across a range of projects as we talked about earlier. And some of this work that Matt showed today is there's a lot of effort behind it, but a lot of potential results. And so we hope you're going to think about moving into this space if you haven't already. Please feel free to contact us with any questions. I know Zainab and team will also be providing some of our contact information. And for those of you attending today, we'll be sending you some follow-up information, so watch for that in your inbox. So thanks for joining us. And I think that's all we have for today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both Jared and Matt. This is such an important conversation to have, especially as we're thinking about how HR can kind of step up in organizations where they've been overlooked in the past during this kind of unprecedented time and be true business leaders. So this is some great fodder for us to think about. As Jared mentioned, you can reach out to them on their contact information is listed on the slide. There's also a speaker widget on the right of your screen, excuse me, that lists your all of our speakers' LinkedIn information, so you can connect with them there, or you can drop questions in the Q&A chat box, and we will make sure that they get answered after the fact. Thanks so much for your time.